think we're live. Awesome. Guys, today's live session, I'm going to kick it off. We've got the Q&A, so you guys are welcome to post any questions down in the comment section. I'll be going through those momentarily. And I wanted to start off today's session just talking about the question of should you, if you've got a back injury, you've got sciatica, you've got a herniated disc, something like that, should you be going to the gym and using the leg press? We talk a lot about squats for recovering from back pain. Should you be going to the gym and using a leg press machine, a hack squat machine, these other kind of machines, right? And hopefully this change in opinion is helpful for you guys in seeing the rationale behind why we talk about the things that we do, why we talk so confidently and so vigorously about things like the squat, etc., as foundational elements of your rehabilitation, so you can better understand, you know, how to move forwards and why we say the things we say. Because a big part of what we're doing here is really helping you guys understand the lay of the land when it comes to recovering from your back injuries, why you're doing certain exercises on the rehabilitation front, why they're good, why maybe, for example, although the leg press sounds like a good option, right, because it's not got load on your spine, it's not really necessarily so helpful. So you can, you know, be more informed about what you're doing going forwards, because at the end of the day, you want to get out of pain. So you want to do the right things rather than things that are going to mess things up. So years ago, I would be very much of a proponent of using the leg press machine. Not the one where you're sat on the ground with your legs up in the air, but the one where you sit on it, it's in a commercial gym, you use the pins and you off you go. But it doesn't make sense when you start to think about the purpose of the exercises that we're trying to do and some of the challenges that many people have, especially the gym goer perhaps, can have as they start to scale the resistances getting back into training. And so one of the big reasons that we're doing the squat specifically, because people say, well, should I do the squat, or should I do the squat? How about I do the leg press instead because it's got less load on the spine? One of the reasons we're doing some of those foundational exercises for recovering from back pain is because we're getting technical improvement and there's spillover benefits from the exercises. You're not just doing a squat to get your back stronger again and get your squat stronger again. You are doing a squat as a foundational part of your rehabilitation when you're recovering from back pain from day one, because you acknowledge, hopefully after this little chat, that you are doing squats every single day, whether you like it or not. You squat to get out of bed in the morning, you squat to get off the toilet seat, etc. You might squat in a lot of pain, as we discussed yesterday on the live stream. Just simple cues on how to get out of the chair, off the toilet seat, out of the bed can make a massive difference instantly in terms of the degree to which you are in discomfort when you're getting out of that bed, to help lessen the aggravation of your lower back or symptoms in your lower back. So that's a really, really important realization. So when we're doing a squat, it's not just about getting stronger, although we will do that. Over time, we will start to use the right kind of loads. We will start to build that load to strengthen up the very sections of our lower back that have been injured, as well as the muscles around that area, as well as the muscles down in the legs. But you are practicing the squat so that you don't have to. And the amount of time someone will come into the clinic and we'll go, okay, we're going to do a squat evaluation. And they go there and they stand there and they go, okay, right. You can see their brain working. They're plugging in, like you might have seen, if those of you who've seen The Matrix, right? When they plug in the program for him to learn Kung Fu, you can see them plugging in the squat program and they think, okay, yeah, and then like that, or something like that, right? That might be an example. Sometimes it's just very, and they slowly, etc. You can see how much they're thinking about doing the squat. And they might actually do it correctly the first time. They go, okay, really thinking, okay, good, and they come back up, okay, that's my squat. And then you go, okay, well, how often are you paying that much attention when you're getting out of the chair, when you're getting, you know, sitting down at the dinner table, getting into the car? Are you paying that much attention? Probably not, which is why we're practicing the squat for our back health so much, because we're getting better and better at instinctively just loading the squat program and off we go, so that we're doing it in a way that doesn't aggravate the lumbar spine, so that it's subconscious, not something we seriously need to work at. So if we take this back to the conversation around the leg press, just from a practical point of view, sitting there on a machine and going like this is not giving us any of that same technical skill that is applicable to real life. I talk quite commonly about the criticism of using things like the inversion table's good, like the Roman chair, where people are doing the back extension on the back extension machine, right? And I say, like, you're just making something less applicable to daily life. You're making it less relatable to the things that you do every day, and therefore less useful, when you could just do a hip hinge, because a hip hinge is reminiscent of a bending motion. Why are you getting into some funny piece of equipment to then do exactly the same thing when you could do it in a way that's more true to the real world? The closer we can apply our rehabilitation to activities of daily living, the better we are going to do, which is one of the reasons why getting the chair stuck. You getting that exercise like the Superman and lying on your tummy and floundering around like that, how often are you doing that kind of stuff every day? Now you might be, I don't know, but most people aren't. So it's very useless in terms of the application to daily life. That's why we don't waste time with those kind of things. I'm being a bit facetious there with the example. I look like a floundering fish, but you guys get the idea. So if we have a version of the exercise that is applicable to real life, which means we get extra benefit. We learn the exercise in the context of the exercise, and then we're also doing it more correctly and practicing multiple times a day, we get extra benefit. Why is this important? Because you're not using the leg press for 16 hours of the day, but for that 16 hours of the day, you are getting up and down out of various seats. And so the more we can practice something that will benefit us across the hours of the day, helps decrease the frequency of flare-ups. If every time you get out of a chair, you're doing, oh gosh, as I was discussing yesterday, you're aggravating your back every time. You're irritating and straining those tissues every time. If you instinctively start to learn how to come down into the position and come up from the position, all of a sudden, those constant recurrent aggravations that are holding you back, that are constantly flaring up the tissues, making you rely on painkillers and other practices that are not helpful, start to happen less and less and less. And so that allows you to start making progress. We get people commenting frequently, and obviously members in the program, but people commenting on here, they come on the lives, or they do some of the core 5 that is all freely available in playlists and this, that, across the YouTube channel and across the website and across on TikTok as well. I was doing these and I've started to make some improvement and it's only been a couple of days. It's like, great. Most of the improvement that you're making is you're just getting technically better at performing some of those essential movements, so you're not messing yourself up as much on a daily basis. Do not underestimate the impact of stopping doing the bad stuff and how that can really start to allow your body to try and make more progress on the healing front. So that's the main issue with something like a leg press, which is taking a useful activity and making it less applicable to daily life. The secondary issue with something like a leg press, as it pertains to recovering from these herniated discs, injuries in the lower back, is more so for the athletic among you and those that are progressing on through the rehabilitation. There is often a significant strength difference between these and this. And so when we are training, often people, when they are recovering from back injuries, they are going to get to a point where their legs, especially the trained individual, where their legs can tolerate the load, their buttocks can tolerate the load, the glutes, the hamstrings, etc., can tolerate the load, but the spine can't. And so being intimately aware of that limitation is very important. If we're just using the leg press, assuming we're using it correctly, we run the risk of being able to get our legs much, much stronger at a rate faster than our back can handle. And then we create this disparity. Whereas if we're doing movements like the squat and the hip hinge, we're constantly training an integrated system. The whole thing is doing the exercises, doing the load. So you march at the speed of the slowest soldier. If that's your dodgy left knee, that's your dodgy left knee. For most of you, it's going to be the back. But at some point, the back might actually be doing quite good, but it's that knee that's bothering you, so you do that. You don't then divert and work around that to create even more disparity between the back and the legs. And the leg press can allow you to do this. Other errors that people make on things like the leg press is that it's very easy to get away with, as you come into this position, depending on what kind of leg press you're using, to round the lower back like so, often to bury the rep. So that's another challenge that people have with the leg press. Again, not particularly helpful, let alone if we're using the bodybuilding styled leg presses, where you're getting down, sitting on the floor, your legs are above your head. Those of you that know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. And that in of itself is just, you're contorting yourself into that seat, and then you're there, and then the weight's coming down and pressing out again. That's just not ideal. It's just build up a significant amount of load tolerance in your lumbar spine, and then you can go over and start looking at those kind of things. At those kind of exercises if you absolutely need to, but you need to make some significant progress first before we start training for enjoyment rather than rehabilitation purposes. Robert said here, just out of hospital after having paraspinal muscle inflammation and real amounts of pain. Have a look at what's causing that inflammation, Rob. It's most likely going to be something going on in that lumbar spine. Just having a look at what we've got here. Do you know how to fix posterior pelvic tilt and flat back syndrome? Jack, one of the things that we do with our members is they often upload their X-ray imaging, right? They upload images of their spine, and we do the measurement analysis. Because flat back syndrome, I don't think that's a thing. I mean, you might have a flat back, but I wouldn't call it a syndrome. I just call it adaptation to flattening your lumbar spine all the time, right? And it's helpful perhaps to explain how this comes about and why it actually is rather common. So we often review members' x-rays, they upload them, we actually measure them. So you can tell the person has a 37.5% reduction in the lordosis, meaning that we should have a natural lordosis to the lumbar spine. If we are suggesting it is flat, that is often accompanied by a posterior pelvic tilt and a straightening of the lumbar spine. What also does this? Sitting like this all day, right? And this is why it's if you do have a persuasion in hyper, meaning too much curve in the back and an anterior pelvic tilt, or hypo, meaning too flat in the lumbar spine and a posterior pelvic tilt, if you're going to be one or the other, apart from neutral and normal, like most of us are, in spite of our back pain, then you're more likely to be flattened, right? Just because of the way in which most people are using their body most of the time. We've discussed this before. Those of you guys that are interested, all of you guys are interesting, I'm sure, but interested, we have a video on the YouTube channel, just a before and after. It's from back in like years ago, but back in the clinic in London, and it was a before and after of some patient x-rays. And you can see the difference, the change in curvature, which takes place. And the reason I'm mentioning this is very, very important because it helps you guys understand, why this is likely to be the case in more of you than not, if you do have any persuasion, and also realize how you're perpetuating this problem. It's not some sort of syndrome. It's a perfectly reasonable response to using your body in a certain way, repetitively over months to years. And so one of the things that we used to do is spinal remodeling. I've discussed it before, using things like a Denneroll. This is a powerful mechanism for changing the shape of the lumbar spine. We would always do it with it measured, hence why we have the before and after x-rays. But we are literally using that device for 20 minutes a day. You lie over it. I'm not suggesting you do this because you haven't had it measured, I suspect. You lie over it like so, and it's very, very effective. 20 minutes a day over a 3 to 4 month period, you can increase the rate of curve in the lumbar spine by around about 25%. There are some caveats there with regards to degenerative change, the sizes of the discs, etc., depending on how herniated they are or might not be, any arthritic change in the facet joints, etc. That can affect the rate of change. But generally speaking, you can make a significant improvement. Why do I say that? Because literally 20 minutes a day of a stretch for a period of 3 to 4 months can get measurable change on an x-ray. And by the way, that's not doing it and then standing up and quickly taking the x-ray. That's the person who's doing it at home and then they go to the clinic. It wasn't our clinic at the time, right? I've done it before where I've done the before and after x-rays, but this we were working with an independent clinic. For those of you guys that are interested, you can look up Orion Imaging in central London. They're a hub where you can get x-rays, things like that done, and other places as well. But MRIs, etc. They're doing the independent imaging, and you get the before and after, and boom, you can see it. Right? You can see the difference, measured by an independent that's got nothing to do with us, radiologist, taking the x-ray as well. So it's not like you're standing there making a funny positioning. My point is 20 minutes a day of a static stretch like so is enough to change the curvature of the lumbar spine when it's done consistently. How many of you guys are sat like this for hours every day? Right? And then you get somehow told you've got an anterior pelvic tilt, which makes no sense whatsoever, and often isn't the case. So when it comes to how do I fix this, which is obviously the important question, firstly, you've got to actually have it measured, right? You have to actually have an acknowledgement of the measurement. It might be that it's marginally reduced. There are some caveats in the spine. I might be going a little bit too detailed for you guys, so I apologize if this is way over the top, but I'll cover it anyway because for some of you guys it might be relevant. The relationship between where the hip is and where the sacrum is slightly variable, and this is something that's fixed. It's not going to change. And so that for alignment purposes, some people do need to have a little bit of a reduced lumbar curve compared to the average, and some people do need to have a slightly increased lumbar curve compared to the average, and you can measure that when you're doing analyses of the pelvis on a X-ray standing. The thing about those measurements is they don't change whatever position the person's in. They're fixed. It's just that relationship in this individual between the hip socket and their sacrum. But that indicates whether the person should perhaps have a slightly reduced lumbar curve or should perhaps have a slightly increased lumbar curve. But the vast majority of you guys are going to have normal anatomy. So that's important to bear in mind. But if you're going to fix it, the most important thing you can do is start rebuilding strength and resilience into your lumbar spine. Don't try and bend your pelvis one way or stick your bum out a little bit more. You're going to make things wrong. People used to say to us when we were back in the clinic, well, this is not in my clinic, in the early days where we'd see people with these kind of things a little bit more, is that they'd say, oh, I've got a scoliosis or a leaning of my spine to one side or the other. Should I put my bag on my other shoulder? It's like, no. If you've been told you've got an anterior pelvic tilt, just leave it. If you've been told you've got a posterior pelvic tilt, just leave it. Unless it's measured on X-ray. Standing X-ray, then we can talk about some things. But generally speaking, if you're struggling enough to control your body to do a squat correctly or to do a hip hinge correctly, what on earth makes you think that you have the appropriate coordination to be able to tuck your pelvis by 21 degrees to bring it back to the quote unquote normal? We're going to end up just messing it up. So we're better off focusing on rebuilding strength and stability. And then if we have the measurements, we can go and get someone to help us out with changing them. It's not hard work. You just have to use these kind of things, but you need to use them responsibly. You won't be able to get hold of those, on the internet. They don't sell them very readily. You can generally get them off, a qualified chiropractor or an osteopath that's doing this kind of stuff. But just something to bear in mind. Focus on your rehab work first, and don't try and correct these things on your own, because often you end up making more trouble than it's worth. So a couple of things there. Any other questions on that, you guys can post in the comments. Just linking onto YouTube, during a flare-up, is it okay to continue the core 5 exercises? Make sure it's not aggravating. Yeah, whenever you're doing any of your rehab work, I actually think that if you've had a flare-up, number one, most of the flare-ups you'll have in your rehab when you're recovering from injuries down here tend to happen from daily life. It's actually not your rehab that caused the flare-up. It's some random stuff you were doing and you decided you maybe shouldn't have done in retrospect. And actually making use of that additional sensitivity can be quite helpful. You're like, oh, now I'm a bit more sensitive. Maybe when I'm doing my hip hinge, actually I'm not necessarily doing it quite as well as I thought I was. And it starts to hurt when I get to here. Why is that? Maybe it's because I'm rounding my lower back and not actually doing it as well as I thought I was. That could be a factor, right? It gives you pause to think and reflect over whether you're actually doing it correctly or not. And you're a little bit more sensitive. Some of you guys that start doing exercises like the Core 5 or join the program and you're a bit more chronic, you might get away with incorrect technique. And this is why it's really important to record what you're doing when you're doing your rehab if you're taking it seriously. You guys all have smartphones. Every single one of you, ask yourself the question right now if you're live. When was the last time you recorded yourself doing your exercises? And maybe when was the last time you were prompted to record yourself doing your exercises? You should be doing that. Because some of you that are a bit more chronic might well get away with doing it incorrectly, which is why we always have the classification, the guardrails of when you do your exercises, they should be aggravation-free and with correct technique. So you must be evaluating your technique, not it feels right, because the amount of times people will upload a video and go, oh, I thought I was actually doing this, but I can see what's going on there. That's terrible. I didn't think I was doing that. What you think you're doing, what you're actually doing, and what you're supposed to be doing could be often 3 different videos. And we need to make sure they are the same video, the good one, not the bad one, right? Rio has said, when doing squats, I feel like I'm using my quads and I don't feel the glutes working. Is there something to do about it? Part of that is range of motion. If you're only squatting here, like this, you're not really getting to a point where there's enough hip flexion to actually get the glutes really to be the primary loader, if you will. The simple fact of the matter is they will be working. You'll just be finding that your quads are going to be a little bit more responsible for driving most of that movement. As you improve, you're going to potentially feel it a little bit more. The other thing to bear in mind is that some people, depending on their morphology, the way in which they were made, the relationship between their thigh length and their spine length, will have a little bit more of an upright squat, and therefore they tend to work the legs a little bit more than the glutes. Other people like me, for example, have to hip hinge a lot more. When I do a deeper squat, I have to hip hinge more, so I tend to get more glute stimulation, for example. So that's part of that is a bit of morphology. But most people, when they're doing safe squats to start their back rehab, recovering from these herniated discs, sciatica, etc., they will generally be doing shallower squats. Why? Because as you go lower through the squat, you end up running into that barrier of doing a tucking under with the bum, right? So you get to the hips point and then you start to tuck under like so, right? And so that can often happen a little bit higher. So you're often doing shallower squats to start with because you're not very good at them. And as you go lower, 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 we get weaker and weaker, relatively speaking, in the movement. And so that's often why you're just not working at the depth necessary to challenge those areas as pointedly. But you better believe your glutes are still doing something. Right? They're still doing something. They're just not primarily driving the movement. So we could argue that they're having like a stabilizing role until they're having a primarily loaded role as you get to the lower part of the repetition. You guys have been throwing comments in here on TikTok. Let me have a look at these. What have we got? So, I get so much relief by riding my horse. I suppose it's like a squat in a way. Yeah, one of the things, so with horse riding, if you are good at it, from my very limited understanding, but we do have a good number of members that have come through the program over the years that are riders of horses in various disciplines, dressage, etc., social, whatever it may be, is that you're actually not supposed to, correct me if I'm wrong here, sit on the horse. You're supposed to kind of be squatting on the horse. And therefore, in order to do that, you're in a position where you're probably relatively upright and you're actually having to engage yourself to balance. So it's forcing you to actually provide a bit more stabilization for the lumbar spine. And provided you have had a significant amount of recovery and healing and patching up of that lower lumbar spine where we've got the injury, you might well find it kind of feels good, right? Because the rest of the day, you're not really doing stuff that's in such a neutral position, providing support for that area. So you're literally using your musculature to provide support and bracing for that region. And because the activity is quite upright, it's not actually causing you that much pain. But all the other things that might be associated with looking after horses is the stuff that might be getting you caught out. So we've got to make sure that we work on our rehab work alongside that. And Jane has said, yes, it's a squat and a trot. There we go. There we go. Carlito has said, how do I prevent muscle spasms from happening in the future? I'm in severe pain. Carlito, the muscle spasms are happening in response to the injury. So you are injuring or aggravating the herniated disc down here, or the segment that's been injured, right? You're aggravating it. And then as a response to that, you get contractions, reflexive muscle spasm happening in the lower back, which makes the problem worse, right? So how do we stop that happening? By doing the rehabilitation work, right? By strengthening up your midsection, building more support, stabilization into that section of the midsection, the torso, right? Learning to engage and control your core. And then that's why, as we started out in this particular live session, talking about the movements like the squat, the reason that we talk about the core 5, and there's the additional 6th now, single leg hip hinge, dead bug marching bridge, squat, hip hinge, and step up, is because the squat, hip hinge, and step up are movements that you're doing every day. You're probably not very good at them. Most people, when they start doing exercises like those in the program, right, they're actually not very good at them, which is a great test because it makes you realize, gosh, if I'm no good at doing a squat when I'm trying to do a squat, imagine how many times I'm doing the squat badly when I'm not trying to do the squat, i.e. when I'm just getting out of a chair or getting in and out of the car. It really opens one's eyes to the areas of inadequacy in our technique, our ability to move our body through space without putting certain tissues under unnecessary duress, especially when those tissues are injured, right? Because most of the time before they were injured, you didn't have to worry about it. You could do what you wanted. But now they're injured, you have to be more conscientious about these things. So doing your rehab work fundamentally is how you do that. And then the role of the rehab work evolves into more strength training. It's really the same thing, right? It's just done at a different level of intensity. We're calling it a different thing at a different time. But you're building strength back into the lumbar spine so that it is more resilient to strain. So there is less likelihood of you injuring or re-injuring or aggravating these sections in the lower back, resulting in the symptoms that you might experience. Now, in Carlito's case, it might well be that he's getting muscle spasm in the back. For someone else, it might be tingling going down the leg. For someone else, it's raging sciatica, shooting down the leg into the buttocks, for example. It varies from one person to the next, but it's the same root cause problem. Rio has said, should we release trigger points before doing the core 5? I think we're probably getting into the weeds a little bit there, to be completely honest. I think doing some element of massage gun work is helpful. But in terms of releasing trigger points, I think we're getting too complex. If you want to go and do some work on those with like a massage therapist or something like that, by all means. But in order to release those trigger points, you're generally doing something that looks like pressing on them really hard, right? So the perceived mechanism of action, and you should discuss this with your therapist that's doing this kind of stuff. I don't do this kind of stuff because it doesn't make sense. So often people will go and have strong trigger point work, etc. If you had trigger point work done, I always remember one case where I had some trigger point work done to my shoulder. And I was a student at the time, and one of the tutors, I'm face down in the plinth, and the tutor has got his elbow onto somewhere around here on my shoulder. And he was digging in there terribly. And it literally felt like I was being stabbed in the back of the shoulder. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. It was that painful because he was pressing so hard into that area where there was a supposed trigger point or not, or whatever you want to call it. And quite frankly, I felt amazing afterwards just because he'd stopped what felt like stabbing me in the back or in the shoulder, right? How much of these trigger points is actually you're just causing so much short-term pain that there's just kind of like this reflexive when it's finally gone. Now, a simplistic understanding or explanation for the mechanism of action is that there's this knot there, and if we jam our elbow into it and break it down, it'll go through a normal healing process and clean itself back up again, right? But often you're doing this in muscles that are dysfunctional at best, hamstrings, glutes, etc. And so what do you think they're going to do any better of a job this time at healing? You've still got a root cause issue of the lower back, for example, L5S1, sending signals down to the buttocks or the hamstrings down here, where you've got these supposed muscle knots. You're now going to damage that muscle tissue, and then you're expecting it to heal properly this time round, while it's still got those descending inhibitory controls or dysfunctional controls, telling it to tighten up all the time. I'm not so sure. And so often people will go and have a deep massage, deep tissue massage, and they'll feel nice, and then later they'll be like, oh my gosh, I feel so much worse. Why? Because when the muscles are injured, you go through this short-term period of actually feeling maybe a little bit worse, right? A little bit more stiff as those muscles react to the massage. Drink lots of water. Why? Because lots of waste products are going to be built up because you damaged the tissue by pressing in so hard. It hurts. You are causing tissue damage. That is the mechanism of action. Tissue damage, which in the healthy athlete, they will recover from and do well with. In the injured person whose muscular system and lower back and all the areas that it controls are dysfunctional, you end up then go, gosh, I feel terrible. I feel absolutely terrible. So next time you're preparing dinner, if you've got a piece of steak, muscle tissue, stick it on your kitchen countertop and lean your body weight elbow through that piece of steak and then look at it and tell me if it looks like it's better off or worse off. I'm being a bit facetious here, but I think less is more in the case of muscle work. And trying to absolutely hammer through those poor little muscles, I don't know that's necessarily a good thing. Right? We're not looking for short-term effectiveness when we're doing our core 5. The core 5 is a project of building strength and stability into those tissues. So I think doing something that could be perceived in the more aggressive category, from personal experience doing it and choosing to not do it, more importantly, and having it done on me, I would suggest that while it can be really, really helpful for a really in-shape individual who's training hard and this, that, the other, the rules need to change a little bit when we're dealing with a person whose body isn't working properly because they've got an injury. And so that's something to consider. Something to consider. I think the utilization of massage guns, etc., is way more effective. You can do smaller dosages. You don't press so hard. We explicitly state, don't press so hard. And you can give it a little once over before you work out. Now that can actually be helpful to get a little bit of blood flow to the area. You feel it kind of warming up after you've done the massage work, and then you can get on with it. But doing explicit deep tissue inhibition work, I'm just not a big fan of it personally. Hopefully that kind of insight gives you a bit of a explanation as to why. If I have spinal decompression, how do I fix that? I'm not sure of the context here, 420. Let me just bring this a little bit closer here. What will help a bulging disc and SIJ issue? I'm going to assume, Lula, that the bulging disc and SIJ issues, well, I know where the SIJ issue is, it's in the SIJ, which is the interaction between the orange and the white on each side, right? Those joints, for reference, people get really obsessed about the SIJs, and I think that's the fault of the practitioners, not the patients, because the patient only gets fixated on the SIJ when it's fixated on by a practitioner who just diagnoses everything as SIJs. We had tutors at university, everything's an SIJ. And it's so difficult to get around that. I mean, one could say you're saying everything's a disc, and really we're talking about everything being a segment, but we talk about the disc a lot. The SIJ, the joint surfaces are kind of like my knuckles here. They're like that. They don't move a lot. Apart from if you are a pregnant lady, the SIJs don't move so much, but they do move a little bit. And they move a little bit at the end of ranges. So for example, we discussed earlier the person that had the flattened lumbar lordosis and the posteriorly tilted pelvis. That causes a little bit of relative increase in mobility at the SIJs. If you had a hyperlordosis, it would cause, with an actual measured anterior pelvic tilt, it causes a locking in of those positions. Why? Why would the SIJ become slightly looser, slightly less engaged? Now we're talking about relatively speaking, when we are in a posterior pelvic tilt. And why would it become relatively more engaged when we are in a relative anterior pelvic tilt or neutral position? Well, it's first going off on a tangent here actually, because we did a podcast episode on the SIJ a while ago. And one of the important things here is about the movement of the SIJ. And it doesn't move a lot. And one of the punchlines, if you will, was that a lot of practitioners will say, oh, your SIJ is moving, your SIJ is stuck, this, that, the other. When they actually do studies where they measure the movement with kind of implanted devices and imaging, and then they compare that to the practitioners measuring the movement of the SIJ, again, not in the pregnant lady, but in the normal population, so guys, non-pregnant women, right? Basically all the practitioners, and this is skilled practitioners, were feeling it's just the skin moving over the top, right? They're not feeling any movement. There's hardly any movement happening at the SIJ, and your practitioner most likely isn't feeling anything. They're just feeling the skin moving over the bony bits. So the ability of the practitioner to actually diagnose any kind of movement in the SIJ relative to like what's actually happening is quite poor. So please bear that in mind if your practitioner said, oh, it's not moving it better, or now it's moving better again, right? And the reason I say that is because that's how you might get onto the side of a patient, like so, and you press down on the side here to get it to flare, supposedly. And the point is that these studies are showing nothing's really happening there. You're just feeling soft tissues moving. So why does the SIJ open out a little bit more when it's in a posterior tilt? Well, it would make sense because it's helping you move a little bit more. When would you posterior pelvic? If you were sat like so, if you were sat on the floor, if you were doing something down here, you'd want a little bit more movement as you're trying to get down and do stuff. So the SIJ flares out a little bit. It's also very unlikely that in that position down there, when the SIJ is allowing for a little bit more movement to dampen the flexion from the hips into the lumbar spine, it's very unlikely that it's going to be exposed to a significant amount of load. So those connections open out a little bit, so it allows a little bit more movement. When, however, it's in the upright neutral position with a relatively more anteriorly rotated position, it's locked in. Why is this important? Because you might be carrying something in the upright position. You're walking around load bearing, you might be impacting. So you want it to be connected so it's not going to slip. So you want to have that integrity back into the joint. What's more is you can't move your SIJ. You don't have control over it. You cannot independently move the SIJ. And you can't independently move L5S1. Down here where most of you guys have your issues. Or L5 or L4-5. L4-5 and L5S1 makes up the region of the spine where the majority of your disc herniations, of your back injuries, of the root causes of your sciatica reside. And you can't control those areas. Most of the stabilization of the SIJ is done through significant mesh of ligament tissues. You don't control it. What you can control is the midsection. You can control the area between the pelvic ring and the ribcage ring and bracing that area, which provides support and protection to the whole lot. That's fundamentally what we do in the program. And guys, those of you that are with us, have been with us for a little while, we're halfway through the live. Hopefully it's been helpful for you guys. If it has, give it a thumbs up or whichever, right? But if it has been helpful and you need a little bit more support, you're struggling with your back pain, your sciatica, etc. If you're on TikTok, go and check out the link up here. If you're on YouTube, if you're watching live or otherwise, you can check out the link, the pinned comment. Watch the video there on that page. It explains a little bit more about the program. Because some of you guys, you just need that structure and guidance and you're going to do well. You'll be able to recover, even if you've had it for a long period of time. Melanie said, my knees start to ache since I've been squatting down rather than bending. Is this normal? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because most of you guys have weakness in the legs. You realize this when you can't squat. You realize this when you're not very good at the hip hinges. We don't have very strong leg muscles. And so I used the example on a comment today that when I injured my knee in June, got the meniscus tears, I couldn't do, I get to here and all of a sudden kill switch, I have no power, it just collapses. I couldn't do it. So what was happening is for a period of time, I was having to rely on my back to do things, right? I might have to bend over and round my lower back, stuff that we talk about not doing. But because I had a strong body, because I've built resilience, I could abuse my back, abuse my other leg for a period of time while this is recovering and while I'm doing my rehab and get away with it. All too often, people are so fragile from here down because they don't do anything of significant magnitude. And unfortunately, too many times people come and say, well, yeah, but I do stuff to keep fit. And it's like, okay, objectively speaking, what does that mean? How fast do you run? How much can you lift? Those are the only things that we really can go on. I keep fit doesn't unfortunately mean anything, right? And because the answer often is, oh, well, I walk the dog and I do a bit of stuff in the gym. Okay, what do you do in the gym? Oh, well, I do some 3-kilo dumbbell curls. Okay, that's not keeping fit, right? That's not keeping strong. That's not building strength and resilience. That's doing something, and that's better than nothing, for sure. But it's not the same kind of caliber. So a lot of people are harboring this significant weakness down here. So when you injure the back and you start doing the rehab, you realize, gosh, my knees actually are really bad as well. My hips actually are pretty terrible too. And it creates a little bit of trouble because you realize you start trying to do the right stuff and the knee's going, which is why I said earlier, you have to march at the speed of the slowest soldier. So in Mel's case, the knee's starting to become a big problem. Why? Because probably she's focusing so much on the back when she's doing the squats that she's maybe neglecting the fact that the knees are doing this. And this is one of the big reasons why in the members area, we encourage, insist, have significant prompts for you guys to record yourself when you're doing the squats. For you guys to record yourself when you're doing the hip hinges. For you to share them in the group with us so we can give you guidance. Because the most important thing when we're doing these things is that we're doing them technically correctly first. Understand you're not changing much technically when you're learning the technique. You're just learning to be safer and mess up your back less frequently. But if there are other areas, knees, hips, ankles, etc., that are problems, we need to make sure we consider those as we're going forwards. And so it might mean that Mel needs to focus a little bit more on the hip hinges for a period of time and adjust the squats to a level that doesn't aggravate the knees, i.e. not quite as deep. Maybe she needs to use a bit of support, holding onto a support. This is too low, but you guys on TikTok, I don't want to move the camera. So maybe she's holding on to a bit of support, right, to make it a little bit easier on the knee joint, for example. But I don't know 100%. You're gonna have to go on a few kind of bit of exploratory work there. But guys, like those of you that are in the program, I know some of you guys are joining the lives now that we're doing them on here a little bit more. You know, if you are, get into the members group, do a post, upload a video. Hey Mike, I'm doing this is where it's hurting on the squats. As I get to this point, it bothers me, etc., etc. Now, often it might well be actually you're doing the squats really well, but because you're now doing the squats and you're doing all the other stuff, you're not paying attention when you're doing the other stuff, right? So, for example, you might be going up the stairs. You're doing your step up, for example, correctly. Okay, you're doing your step up really good, right? The knee's nice and solid. But when you go up the stairs, when you're rushing up carrying the laundry, your knee's going all over the place. And so before, your knee was just going over the place when you went up the stairs, but now because you're doing extra stuff, it's becoming a little bit too much. Cumulatively, it's too much. And so those other areas need to be addressed. Remember, when you're learning these exercises, these things, you should be applying them to daily life to make sure that you are not just doing the exercises for half an hour. You're benefiting from that for the rest of the day because you're thinking about how you move more sensibly through the day. Looking through some of these comments that are coming in. What else have we got? Peptides help post meniscectomy. So funny, I was actually talking about this with my brother the other day. And I was doing a little bit of research on them, the BPC 157. Now, please bear in mind, caveat, I'm not an expert in peptides. I was doing a little bit of research into some of the research on them. It was quite interesting. So initially, the peptides look really cool. They tend to be injectables, but some of the research, because I've been aware of them more, and these are basically healing compounds. So peptides, the BPC has something protective compound or something like that. I forget the exact names, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but they are considered to be natural compounds that help your body heal. And they work in slightly different ways. There's two main ones that people get to talk about, BPC 157 and TB 500. And they supposedly, through different mechanisms, help support good tissue healing. And I was a bit skeptical because I've seen a lot of companies selling like the pills, but it does apparently look as though a lot of the research is done with either oral or injectable dosages, and they seem to both get outcomes in terms of improving tissue healing. What that actually means in terms of like a measurable impact, I don't really know, but it was enough for me to go, maybe I should go and get some. They're not cheap, and I would suggest with this kind of stuff, you do not go cheap, but it's something that I definitely do a bit more research on, and maybe chat to some people that are a bit more into this space. I know in the bodybuilding space, it's something that is talked about quite a lot. They tend to be using the injectable versions, but something definitely to look into more, whether it's lower back or whether it's meniscus injuries or anything else like that. I think it's very interesting. It's really exciting. And it's something that, at least the mechanism of action, the way in which it's working, what it's actually doing in your body, kind of sounds good, right? Helping my body go through a healing process, enhancing and supporting the natural healing process. That sounds cool. Stopping my nerves, telling my brain what's going on, doesn't sound as cool, right? And that's, the classic injections or nerve blocks. What else have we got here? By the way, someone commented that I fidget a lot on the videos. And part of me as I'm doing this is because there's these little squares down here that the wheels on the chair get caught in. And I've only just realized that I do that to try and get it over the chair. And it looks like I'm going a bit crazy. I'm just trying to get closer without knocking all the stuff that's here and under the table. So yeah, thanks for that comment. What else we got here? We've got some more on YouTube. I watched a video on YouTube. A physical therapist said that core exercises didn't work if you hadn't facilitated your inhibit. Yeah, Roy, not Rio, Roy. I think some people are trying to make things unnecessarily complicated. There's probably a special little thing that you had to do, or pay for to do that. I think people are getting. One of the biggest things I think you realize is that when you're going through this kind of job, and I think with most jobs, that there's this early part where things look, you need to know a lot of detail, right? And then as you start to really get good at this stuff and you've been dealing with it a lot and you've seen thousands and thousands of patients and you've seen thousands and thousands of x-rays and you have this intimate understanding and it's all this, you start to realize that actually it maybe is an awful lot more simple than perhaps we'd like to think. And hopefully one of the big things I try and do is make it simple so you guys can understand. Because a lot of the technical jargon and that kind of stuff with long words and inhibited muscles and what does that sound like? And none of my core work is going to work until I do that. It sounds like very complex and I couldn't possibly understand it, me as the mere layperson. And that sometimes is used to justify, well, boom, there's a big price tag over here. And I'm just being a bit skeptical there, but I think there's a lot of that in a lot of different industries. And I'd probably ignore that. Like the notion that you can't do, these kind of notions are quite misguided. I think they don't properly understand back pain themselves, perhaps, is my best analogy, Roy. Roy. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Because quite frankly, the inhibited muscles or the dysfunctional muscles are primarily because this section here isn't working properly, and that is communicating with the lower back. And so that's the issue, not the core, not anything else. That is the issue that is causing the dysfunction in the muscles. So hopefully it makes sense. Anyone that's talking about a primarily muscle-focused problem that needs addressing is probably not quite getting there. Like you need to fix some kind of muscle issue beyond talking about just strengthening up the muscles, right? If they're talking about some quirky little feature that's very niche, et cetera, that, oh, you've got to fix that before any other exercise works, I'd be a bit skeptical about that kind of stuff. Or I'd want it to be explained very, very thoroughly at extreme length live, because that really shows whether people actually understand what they're talking about or whether they're kind of starting to speak in ways that maybe they're losing themselves a little bit. Magdalena has said here, recovering from flare-up over the past 10 weeks, disc bulges at L4-5 and L5-S1, mild herniation. Doing the core 5 and relief routine, feel like nothing works, feeling hopeless. When will my bulging disc heal? Magdalena, I'm not sure if you're in the program or not, but you have to progress. You have to progress. One of the big things is that the progress comes from progressing through the process. So the biggest question we always ask members of the program, what are you currently doing on the hip hinge? Magdalena, what are you currently doing on a squat? What load are you doing? And if it's not something like 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, we haven't made progress, right? Remember, there are 3 parts, and the third is a long part to you doing the rehab work. Firstly, you find the right technique with these kind of exercises. You need to actually be able to perform them in a way that doesn't aggravate the back. Secondly, you need to find the right intensity that you are working, that you're actually challenging yourself. If we're still messing around with 3, 4, 5 kilos or 0 kilos or whatever it may be, then we're not actually necessarily finding that a correct level. And thirdly, we then need to do that and progress that load over the long term. Meaning if you're doing 2 to 4 kilos, that's not enough. You're not going to fix anything doing 2 to 4 kilos. You need to build the strength and load tolerance, and that takes time. And you need to continue to build that through the levels. We talk about 3 levels, or I've been talking very recently about 3 levels, numbers that you need to have etched into your mind, Magdalena and others that are doing things like the core 5. Number 1, what is 10% of your body weight? Number 2, what is 45% of your body weight? And number 3, what is 100% or 75% of your body weight? That might be, for example, for me, it's going to be about 20 kilos, it's going to be about 45 kilos, it's going to be about 90 kilos. If you are not squatting more than those, particularly the first 2 numbers, or hip hinging those, you've got work to do, right? You're not there yet. Cool. But you will notice that symptoms get better when you make progress on the rehab, not the other way around. You need to progress through the rehab so that you get better, not the other way around. Magdalena said, I feel so much pressure in my lower back and upper back and my shoulder blade hurts so much and I think I will never get better. This is my life forever. I would suggest, Magdalena, you need a little bit more help. Check out the link that I pasted in the group. Get involved in the program. One of the other important things here, like it's going to take you some time, but you need help and support. And one of the big things that people often miss when they do the stuff that's just online, right? Because we have 1,500 videos on the YouTube channel. You guys, unfortunately, are probably not assimilating it all, I suspect, because there's a lot there, right? And we've got hundreds of, approaching, I think it's about like 500 to 750,000 words, if not more, worth of articles that we've put on here, on the website. Like one of the big things is the educational stuff. Magdalena said, how can I progress the load when I am in pain? What if I pull the muscle and get another flare? Again, that's why you need more support and guidance, Magdalena, because when you're doing your exercises, they should be aggravation-free, aggravation-free. And so what people often say is, well, I'm in a 3 out of 10 pain all the time, or I'm in a 4 out of 10 pain all the time. Well, I do the exercises, it doesn't get worse. Okay, great, you're doing the exercise, it doesn't get worse. But I'm walking the dog, I'm doing, you need to have a look at all the other things you're doing every single day. And if you're in pain all the time, then you progress with the exercises. Because you're doing other stuff and you're in pain, you may as well do this and make some progress. If you're getting pain during the exercises, aggravation of the pain during the exercises, if you start the exercise and you're a level 3 out of 10, and then you do a squat and you're still level 3 out of 10, great, happy days, right? But if you start the exercise and you're a 3 out of 10, you do a squat and you're a 5 out of 10, we've done something wrong. So we're getting technical errors and we need more help and support. Most of the time for Magdalena, because you haven't got the educational side of things there, because you're just doing the stuff online, just the exercises themselves, you're missing out on like 16 hours of the day. And so you're doing a bunch of others. You're going to the bathroom, right? You're getting out of bed, you're getting dressed. All of that stuff is more complicated, more provocative than your core 5 exercises. But you're doing those. So you may as well make progress. You probably need a bit more help and support because that confidence isn't quite there to do it yourself. So check out the program. But if you're getting aggravations during the exercises, you need to drill down because you're not doing them correctly. You should not be getting aggravation during the exercises. Taking videos and recording yourself while you're doing the exercises is really important to reflecting on those things. Very, very important. That's what we need to do. It's going to take time, but we have to make sure that we are doing things correctly and also not messing ourselves up outside of the workouts. It's no good. We do, and we see this all the time, right? Because everybody's learning, right? It's not a criticism, it's just a comment. I've seen a couple of videos on the members area this last week doing an exercise, right? Person does the exercise, they're actually doing it really well, which is cool, right? So they're doing maybe a dead bug and they do the dead bug and then they finish the dead bug and they do this. Turn the camera off. What have I just done? If on the recording right after the exercise you did a sit-up, twisted and reached, how many times outside of the exercises are you doing exactly the same thing and putting yourself at risk of messing things up? The point is that you need to create these habits. So there, in people like Magdalena and others, a lot of people, right? Every single day, even when you start doing the exercises right next to the exercises, you're doing things wrong because the education needs to be there. This is why we talk about 3 parts of getting better with back pain. You've got to do the actual rehab work. That's what actually gets you better, progress through that. You've got to do the relief work because that takes a bit of pressure off the back, right? It helps you offset the strain of daily life, but you have to have education because you need to know that the education helps you in the 16, 17 and a half hours of every day where you're not actually doing your exercises. It helps you start to realize that, gosh, I'm making a lot of mistakes every day and I'm not going to get significant results if I keep on tripping myself up right after I finish doing something good. It's like imagine you're trying to lose weight and you have a nice salad and then you like trip and fall into a chocolate cake every time. Right? You're not going to do so good. You're not going to have so much success. Heart. It said, do you have one-to-one support in the program? We have a members area where people will upload videos, post questions, comments, ask for feedback and all of that kind of stuff. And they do that daily, multiple times a day, even in many cases, right? To get the support that you need. We also do have the facility for people coming down to the clinic. We do the treatments and things like the decompression in the other room, the laser in the other room. We also do virtual consultations. What I will say is, although those options are available, the amount of instruction, support, guidance through the program, troubleshooting videos, like there's hundreds of videos in there. It's structured in a very intuitive way to guide you through the program. So you're not having to deal with all of the videos, but you go through them in the right order. That most people don't need that one-to-one support. Because basically you have one-to-one support every single day because you consult a video, you watch this video, you watch that video, you get the form back, you go and you're learning every single day. You can spend as long or as little as you want doing that. But the support is there, and if you need extra virtual consultations, you can always book those in separately. Can you talk about dura nerve guarding for sciatica? Not really. I think those kind of things, we're getting a little bit into the weeds, I think, Kyle, to be honest. Yeah, that's what I'd say with that. Don't have pain anymore, but when I bend over, I can feel a stretch. If you're bending over, and like for example, if you're bending over and you feel a stretch, like that's like saying I feel a stretch when I do that. Like that's not necessarily an issue, Muggy. I don't know if that's necessarily an issue. If what I've just demonstrated, like, yeah, because you're stretching that area. I don't know, I'd repeatedly do it just to feel the stretch and stretch and stretch and stretch, but I don't think that's unreasonable. Marissa said, how do I identify pain from SIJ or my L4-5, F5S1? Marissa, that's a very good question. We covered this a little bit earlier on, right? You can't control these individual segments. What you've most likely got is a better description of your issue is that it's the whole lot. And do you know why? Because you rehab the whole lot. You can't do SIJ rehab or L5S1 rehab or L4-5 rehab. How do you stabilize any one of these joints? Exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. The detail of the herniated L4-5 on the left-hand side where it's going out like this, as opposed to the right-hand side, is there for the surgeon that needs to make sure he goes in on the right side or the correct side. It's not there for you or I from the rehabilitation point of view. Sure, we can do some things, for example, with the laser. We need to know where we are. Is it this region, or is it up here, or is it the shoulder that we're doing the laser on? Or if we're doing decompression, we can modify things a little bit to target down to specific areas. But your rehab work, you do the same. Because when you're doing, for example, a squat, you are stabilizing your SIJ, you are stabilizing your L5S1, you are stabilizing your L4-5, 3, 2, 1, TL. You're stabilizing the whole lot if you're doing it correctly. When you're doing a step up, it's a little bit more asymmetrical, challenging, but you're still doing exactly the same thing. Now, if you had what one might say is an SIJ issue, but I don't really subscribe to those kind of diagnoses. I think lumbar spine you can more formally diagnose. SIJs tend to, if they are actually problematic, they are more problematic as a consequence of significant dysfunction in the lower back and a second order issue. Often because we've been doing so much knee hugs and hugging and pulling this kind of stuff that we have actually created a little bit of aggravation or irritation. But the same things that you'll be doing, for, like hugging the knees, all that, it just flares out the SIJs as I was mentioning earlier. So I would focus a little bit more on just doing your rehab and stabilizing the whole lot. Because it doesn't change whether it's an SIJ or a L5S1, and you can't functionally realistically differentiate. Like if you could get someone who's got an L5S1 disc issue on the right hand side, and like doing that, they suck at it. Why? Because they're letting their pelvis tilt. That would also bother the person with the SIJ issue as well. One of the and I've been reflecting on some of the provocative testing that we use. Right, one of the tests is a Kemp's test or a facet provocation test. People say if you bend forward and it hurts, I'll choose the neck so you guys can see it. Same thing with the lower back. Oh, well, that's going to be a disc. And if you bend backwards and it hurts, and you go this side and you tilt back, oh, that's going to be a facet joint. But the reality is, if you've got a bit of disc, like as you bend forwards and you strain, yeah, that can stretch the disc. But if the disc isn't fresh enough, if it's got a little bit of tolerance, it might not necessarily be that painful, or if it's a bit chronic. And equally, if we've got a bit of disc bulging back here, when we bend backwards to compress the facet joints, we're also closing these holes, and that might be pinching around a disc bulge and inflammation and creating pain, which we would diagnose as a facet joint problem, but actually it's the fact that we close the hole around the disc that's injured and there's a lot of inflammation there, and actually it's more related to the disc itself, which is why, although we talk a lot about discs, I'll say it again, I've said it 1,000 times, I'm probably going to say it another 1,000 times because I think it needs to be said. We talk a lot about discs, but you injure segments of the back. And really, maybe even the most useful understanding is that really you injured the region, the lumbopelvic region, the lower lumbopelvic region, this area here. That's the level of detail that is sufficient for you doing the rehabilitation work. Webboo has said hyperlordosis exercises. You need to first exercise yourself down to the clinic and make sure you actually have a hyperlordosis, not that it's just been told. The classic hyperlordosis statement is, let me try and demonstrate. Oh, look, your bum sticks out and your tummy sticks out, so you've got hyperlordosis. My lumbar curve doesn't start until here. If my lumbar curve started here, I could see why you would say that. But my lumbar curve doesn't start till about here. You can't see any curve. My back muscles are in the way, my glutes stick out, and I'm relaxing my tummy. If I just draw my tummy in, do I no longer have do I no longer have a lordosis, hyperlordosis? No, I just engaged my core as opposed to leaving it hanging out, right? That's just abdominal tone. That's nothing to do with the anterior pelvic tilt and so frequently associated hyperlordosis. Hyperlordosis is banded about all over the place. And I think it's reckless because most of the time people don't have it. And most of the people that are diagnosing the hyperlordosis, the anterior pelvic tilts, have no experience with imaging of significant magnitude. And they haven't had, unfortunately, the painful experience of realizing just how rubbish physical examinations are, just how inaccurate they are. As I mentioned earlier about the SIJ palpation, there are a lot of, feeling the movement of the SIJ that your practitioners might talk about. Other osteopaths like myself, or chiros, or physios. Oh, the SIJ is a bit stuck. What do you even mean? You can't tell the SIJ movement. You have no clue. Just like you have no clue of the movement of the lumbar spine. It's so deep in the body, you have no way of perceiving its measurement. The elbow, on the other hand, you can measure that good. You can see, oh, it's stuck. Hip flexor, right? We can do a nice hip flexor test and see if we're doing Thomas's test and the hip, and we can see very clearly that actually just not quite as mobile as it needs to be. But the lumbar spine, you don't have any clue. Your clinician doesn't have any clue unless they're doing imaging to measure these things. They don't have a clue about how much it's moving. Magdalena has said, if I have a dehydrated disc Can the bulge heal and go back to where it's meant to be? I have annular fissures and have flat back syndrome. God, you've had everything we've been talking about today. Hopefully today, Magdalena has been helpful. I would definitely, if you joined a little bit later, I would go back and watch the start of today's live stream, Magdalena. Your disc is healing all the time. Is it going to look like the one that you looked, like maybe the one at L1-2? No. It's most likely not. Does that mean you can be stronger, healthier, and better? I would suggest, given the types of questions that you've been asking, I would strongly suggest if you execute the rehabilitation correctly over the coming months to years, correctly with guidance and support, probably not doing it on your own, there is because you need that extra help, judging by the questions of today, there is a high probability that you can be both stronger and more stable and more resilient in the lower back specifically, able to tolerate more load than you have in the past period. Almost certainly. You know, maybe if you're in your 80s, you might struggle a little bit, but anywhere up to the mid-60s, certainly. There's a very, very high probability that you can be stronger than you ever were before. Obviously, I have very, very limited knowledge here in terms of the background, right? But to have a dehydrated disc and a disc bulge, an annular fissures, annular tears, and flat back syndrome commentary. And if you have a disc bulge, you have to understand you have some kind of annular damage, right? Even because the disc bulge, we think, oh, the disc and then there's annulus, that's something else, right? The way in which the disc works is that you have a nucleus in here. This is the white bit, right? White meaning it's healthy, red meaning it's injured. It's not actually red in reality. That's just to demonstrate with these models. The annulus fibrosus is made up of a bunch of layers. These layers are the annulus fibrosus, and they are what does the weight bearing. When you squash down on this disc, the fluid in the middle tries to escape. Because it's enclosed by the annulus fibrosus, which stretches a little bit, gives a little bit, acts like a little sponge, absorbing the shock, it will prevent that from moving and load bear. When it fails, these have cracked, broken, torn, fissured, whatever vocabulary you want to use, and this has happened. This has broken through layers of the annulus. So if you have a disc bulge, a disc herniation, it is your annulus fibrosus that needs to heal. It's like if you've damaged your knee cartilage. It's your meniscus that needs to heal. It could be one of the other cartilages, but that is what is healing. That is what is strengthening. That is what we are working on when we are putting load through our spine to progressively build the tolerance of our spine again. That is what will get stronger. And by the way, in Magdalena's scenario, yes, that will get stronger. If you make it stronger. If you don't, it won't. It's that simple, unfortunately. And the problem is, the only thing that was keeping the other segments healthy and strong to a degree was the use of the body on a daily basis. So now we're less active. Now we're not doing our work as much. It is reasonable to suggest that the stimulation that kept these things healthy is lesser, so they will adapt for the negative. A great example here. I currently could not even dream, well, I could dream because I've done it before, but I could not lift 220 kilos on a deadlift. I'm not conditioned for that at all. I might be able to put 140 on, probably could just grind it out a bit. My spinal discs would not tolerate 220 kilos, but they have in the past. And because I haven't trained at that level, I haven't given my body the appropriate stimulation in the recent years, because it's just not been my interest, my body has broken itself down to the point where I could not bear that, but I could before. And that is an example, in a more safe environment, of the breaking down and building up process of your training, of your rehab. And so for a lot of people, the only thing that's kept them to some kind of level is they built it during their childhood and their teenage years, and then they just didn't do anything for the rest of life, anything of significant magnitude. If you're not training at a certain level, you're not doing anything to build anything, right? So you've just been losing it slowly over time. That's not a foregone conclusion, by the way. A lot of that is because we've got life, we've got jobs, we've got family, we've got kids, we've got this, that, the other to look after, so we just don't make time, but we need to. And so the body will just break itself. Then the only thing that's keeping you at this level, going down slowly like this, is the fact that you're doing stuff. Now you've got a back injury. Now we're going off like that because we're a lot less active. So the other areas are not getting the stimulation, the pittance of stimulation that it was getting. And now you find, oh, now I've got L4-5 is a problem. Oh, now L3-4 is. Because we're not actually providing the necessary stimulation. So there's so many benefits to actually doing the proper rehabilitation work and getting it right. But you have to proceed carefully. It's no good after this inspirational chat, going and jumping into the gym, sticking 100 kilos on I keep on pointing over there. You guys over here on TikTok, there is a squat right there, just so you know. Right, I'll move the camera around. It's no good going into the gym, go, right, let's just load up the weight and go. That's wrong. We have to make sure we focus on technique first. Owen has said, I'm feeling much better after doing the core exercises, but the challenge is I have pain in the erector spinae muscles. It's not subsiding. Any advice? It depends on where you are, Owen, but one of the things that we must be doing is, we should be doing, is pairing the strengthening work with relief-based work. Because the reality is you're having to build strength and stability in the spine and in the surrounding tissues around that L5S1. And when you're doing exercises like the squats, the hip hinges, those areas are under strain. And that's why we pair things with the core relief work. We got towel decompression, bed decompression. We suggest people use the massage gun over this area to help manage that whilst you're going through the process of strengthening. And then as you start to get to significant levels, things start to subside more. But it's really a case of progress through the process, right? You don't get to choose which part of your symptoms go first. But as you progress, the symptoms will go. The symptoms will get better. The sensitivities will subside. Owen said, much better from L5S1 disc herniation, but the erector spinae muscles are still there. Of course the muscles are still there, but you're working the muscles. Again, you don't get to, some people will say, oh, my back pain's gone, but I've still got a bit of that numbness that I had on my big toe. It's like, sorry, you don't get to choose which one goes first. It's a case of progressing through the process. And if you haven't finished the process, it's like saying, right, okay, I'm getting the roof done. There's a roof up here, big roof, okay? I've got a hole in it, and someone's repairing the roof. And if I sit here, the rain just comes all the way along this room, okay? But now, if I sit here, I don't get rained on anymore. But if I sit over there, I still get rained on. That's because they fixed this part of the roof, but the job is not complete. So you still have some symptoms. Until the job is complete, the whole roof is done, I'm still going to get water in here. And so just acknowledging that and being okay with that is really important. Saying, right, you know, you've got symptoms, you've got vulnerability, take stock of where you are when you start these kind of things. You know, often we're in a pretty dark place, but we adjust to the present very quickly, right? And we get upset about the things that we're not able to do, again, very quickly. Yeah, but like 6 weeks ago, I wasn't able to get out of bed. Okay, well, yeah, but now they're still bothering me here. Okay, but you haven't finished the process. So keep going. Keep going through the process. Keep building strength. Keep building stability. Keep doing that. As you progress on, worthy of note for Owen specifically and others, you might need to change around the training a little bit in so much that you'll need to decrease the frequency of the hard sessions that you're doing. Perfectly reasonable to do that. Perfectly reasonable to do that, right? But again, this is why having a structure can really help you guys. Because if Owen logged in, he's still on phase 2 or early part of phase 3 of the program, or he's recording his exercises and his loads, he can see, oh yeah, well, of course I still got symptoms. I'm only doing 15, 20 kilos on the squat. I'm only doing 30, 35 kilos on the squat. But I go to work and I carry X, Y, Z. So it's just a case of making the progress. The secret team has come in as if on cue. Keep up the hard work, guys, and have a beautiful day. I have to run. This information is valuable and it does work. Thank you very much. Have a great day. I'm doing this a little bit later in the day, actually, aren't I? So that's probably why some of you different audience are coming in. Have a great day, guys. Where are we at time-wise? Oh, gosh, that's flown by. Goodness me. Okay, let me just have a quick look through TikTok. And guys, if you need more help, please do check out the link up here on TikTok in the profile page. There's a video there that explains a little bit more about the program. You can see what I'm talking about, right? Have a look. If you like it, you can sign up. Those of you on YouTube, if you're watching this after the fact, again, I'll post a pinned comment so you can check it out afterwards. I'll just skim through some of these at the end. I worked from home and did bed rest and now I'm weak. Yeah, that's tough, man. But the good news is the body changes. The body is really, really good. It will get better if you just do the work. It's going to take some time. You can't game the system. Biological tissues change at their own pace, but that's what you've got to do. Jameson says, makes sense. I'm always good until I have a belt on. Yeah, the belt is not ideal. Like if you're struggling to recover, what the belt does is, generally speaking, you're putting the belt around here, and what the belt's doing is creating a false insertion at the level of the hips, which is restricting your hip mobility. Helpful, we got the right one. It restricts hip mobility, so you use your back more. So I would generally try and avoid using a tight belt for a long period of time, especially as you're going through the recovery process. Especially if you're doing a lot of stuff on a daily basis, if you're having to move around, sit down, stand up, all that kind of stuff, I would get rid of the belt. Bar the obvious, resting. How do you deal with niggling injuries when resting isn't really a problem? You compensate for them. Kieran, you have to compensate for them as best you can. As best you can. That's all you can do, right? Oscar said, how much should I do squats tomorrow after the abs workout too yesterday? Oscar, depending on how you're feeling, I'd probably give yourself a little bit of a break. I'd maybe do an easy workout tomorrow, just depending on how you're feeling from that workout. But what day is tomorrow? Tomorrow's Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday, maybe Thursday, look to do a better workout again, Oscar. But update us tomorrow on the live, see how you're doing. What else? Does decompression tables really work to heal the herniated discs? you heal the herniated disc. A decompression table like the one we've got in the room behind here is great. An IDD table is what it's called. IDD spinal decompression table. You've got in the US, there's other brands of that. They're great. They help you do the healing, and they must be paired with rehab. Do not expect them to heal it for you. You do the healing. No treatments heal you. Although, as we discussed with the BPC and the other bits and pieces like laser, for example, stem cells, those can help. But you are doing the healing. Your body is doing the healing. Other questions? What else? What else have we got here? I did. Oh, Oscar, you posted on TikTok. Nice. Peptide sites. Matt, go and watch the repeat of this on YouTube, because I covered peptides in a little bit of detail. I had a bit of chat about that specifically. Guys, I'm gonna leave it there. Hopefully that's been helpful. I do hope that has been helpful. If you need any more help, link up here in the profile page, guys. Thanks to all of you guys posting questions. Sorry I didn't get through all of them. As you can see, there's quite a lot that have come through. I'll be back live again later this week. Keep an eye out. If you remember, we will be live. Tomorrow's Wednesday, so Wednesday. We'll be live on Wednesday, members. Just keep an eye out for that. And we'll be live again on here on YouTube and TikTok later in the week. Need any help in the interim? Check out the link up here. Bye, TikTok. And YouTube, guys, thanks for joining. Oscar, let us know tomorrow. And any of you guys that need help, more help, Magdalena, for example, check out the link I posted, and see you guys next time. Thank you all of you that joined. Bye, guys.